Welcome, and thank you for taking a few minutes to learn more about the Refugee Resettlement Program within the Diocese of Erie. One question that immediately comes to mind for many people is, why does the Diocese of Erie even do refugee resettlement? I think if you look at the mission statement of the Diocese of Erie, that becomes a little clearer. As you can see, with faith in Jesus Christ and commitment to living gospel values, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Erie, in communion with the Universal Church, serves the people of northwestern Pennsylvania. I think it's important to remember that the Catholic Church has always taught that we need to think about our place in the world in terms of, I'll use the analogy of concentric circles. We have to start with ourselves and our own personal relationship with God. But then it branches out. The next concentric circle would be our family. How are we taking that love and our relationship with God and spreading that love to our family? The next concentric circle would be our community, and included in our community would be our parish. So how are we taking the love that we have and the relationship with God, spreading it to our family, and then spreading it to our community and our local parish family? The next concentric circle would be the diocese. So how does our parish and how do we as members of our parish spread that love throughout the Diocese of Erie to make it a better place and to show God's love throughout the Diocese of Erie? And the next concentric circle would be the Universal Church, the world in which we live. And that's where I think the explanation of why do we take care of refugees comes in. In communion with the Universal Church, we take care of our brothers and sisters who are suffering anywhere in the world. And obviously, refugees are a population in the world that are suffering, often through no fault of their own. And so in the Erie Diocese, we have a long tradition dating back to the early 1970s of being part of the Universal Church's effort to take care of the poorest and the weakest among us, the refugees. And so we have always, as part of our mission, or fulfilling our mission, reached out to the larger world and taken care of refugees to make sure that they have a place that they know that the Universal Church cares for them. Here's a short video I'd encourage you to watch. It's only about 4 minutes long, and I think it does a very nice job of explaining the refugee situation. After this video ends, you may need to click the little blue button in the bottom right hand corner of the screen to move on to the next slide. One of the most misunderstood or misrepresented aspects of refugee resettlement is the vetting or screening process that refugees go through. And so I'd like to just kind of quickly walk you through the process of how someone becomes a refugee that ends up coming into the United States. Every refugee, or every person who seeks refugee status, must apply to the United Nations to be identified as a refugee. The United Nations then collects documents, looks at their story, and tries to figure out do they meet the criteria to be accepted as a refugee. This includes their name, their address, birth dates, those kinds of things. They do biometrics, they do fingerprinting, iris scans, those kinds of things, and they do interviews of the person to understand the story and why they think they need refugee status. The next step in the process is their refugees are accepted by a federally funded refugee support center that continues to collect identifying information. They create a file, and again, they continue to do security checks on this individual. The people that are coming to the United States go through a lot of screening by U.S. departments. They are screened by, as you can see on the list here, the National Counterterrorism Center, the intelligence community, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the State Department. Department of Defense is also part of this, and Department of, well, as I said, Homeland Security. They're going through all their databases looking to see if this person or any person associated with them shows up in their databases as unsavory characters or people of concern. They're looking for who this person is associated with, where have they been, what countries have they been to, who do they have any outstanding arrest warrants or any criminal activity. And so they go through this whole process to really screen who is this person that's trying to come to the United States. It's important to note that only 1% or less than 1% of all refugees even make it through the United Nations to the United States screening process. And then from there, more people are weeded out as the United States puts them through their vetting process as well. So the United States, the Department of Homeland Security conducts their interviews. They re-examine the fingerprints and the biometric iris scans against all databases that they have available to them. And if at any point during the process a concern is raised, the person is either dropped from the process altogether, or they go back to an earlier stage in the process and continue through again until the people are absolutely sure that there's no concern. Two other important parts of the screening or vetting process are the medical checks. All refugees coming to the United States are screened for medical conditions to make sure that there aren't any transmittable or contagious diseases coming into the country. That does not mean that refugees coming in have no medical issues. Some have very extreme medical conditions at times, but they're looking to make sure that they're not bringing any actively contagious diseases when they arrive. The other part of the process is people coming to the United States are also beginning the early stages of cultural orientation of what is life like in the United States, what can they expect versus the images they've seen on TV and the idealistic views they have. What really will life be like once they come to the United States? Another misconception or myth that's out there is that the United States government pays to fly the people to the refugees to America. There's a little bit of a misunderstanding there. The United States does underwrite the initial travel costs, but before they travel, refugees must sign a travel loan document with the government and promise to repay. And those repayments have to be made within 48 months, I believe. And there is about a 90% repayment loan, successful repayment of that. The ones that, the 10% outside of that, either repay it after the 48 months, or that travel loan is covered by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, the national organization that we work with. So the federal government is reimbursed 100% for the travel of refugees coming to America. This is a picture of Erie International Airport. All refugees who come to our program arrive through Erie International Airport. They come off the plane and have only 2 bags. All of their earthly possessions have to fit into 2 bags, including their clothing, their personal items, any religious artifacts or books have to fit into 2 full bags. Once the refugees arrive at the airport, we take them to an apartment that we must have provided for them that is fully furnished. Here's an example of what the apartments look like that we provide. Almost every single thing in this room is donated from people like you, who kindly give of their furniture and their lamps and window dressings and all those kinds of things to help our refugees out. Here's a picture of what the kitchen looks like. As you can see, these apartments are not huge, but they are accommodating. Kitchen tables, chairs, appliances generally are supplied by the landlords, but everything else has to be supplied by our agency and it's through the donations of parishes and individuals that we're able to do this. Refugees are eligible in their first few months in the United States for some welfare services. So they do get food stamps, refugee health insurance, those kinds of things. But in the first few days before that takes effect, we need to provide them with food. So here's an example of how we prepare a family for the first 3 to 5 days of living in the United States. We have to stock the refrigerator with food. We have to have utensils for them and all those kinds of things that they're able to come into their apartment and successfully live for the first few days until they're on their feet and ready to go. And when I say stock an apartment, I'm talking everything, including bathrooms, where we have to provide floor mats, toilet paper, shampoo, toothpaste, toothbrushes, all those kinds of things that are required for daily living, we have to provide. And these are all things, generally all things that we seek from people who will volunteer or who will donate to our program. And we are very grateful for all that help. One thing we generally don't accept as donations is beds. Due to the bed bug situation in Erie that was getting out of hand a few years back, we just decided to purchase the beds. We were able to get them at a very low discount price because of the volume that we buy. In this way, we're able to give people a safe and secure bed, and it also helps the landlords to avoid infestation of bed bugs in their apartments. But as you can see from these pictures, what we provide is very low means, including the towels, towels, washcloth, sheets, blankets. Everything you see here are things that could be donated, and if they're not donated, then we have to purchase for the people, but it's not extravagant by any means. And so the apartments that we provide to people, we have a safety checklist that we have to complete and submit it to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, who submits it to the U.S. State Department to verify that we are placing these refugees in safe and affordable homes or apartments. And so we have to look at the rent costs. We have to look at, is there adequate space? Are we adhering to the City of Erie housing requirements, that we're not putting too many people in too small space? We have to look at neighborhood safety issues. Are the refugees going to be safe in this neighborhood? Is there bare wiring or peeling paint or plaster? Is there any mold, smells, any kind of infestation that needs to be taken care of ahead of time? We need to look at the appliances and make sure they're working. We need to make sure that if the person coming in has any kind of disability, can they get into this apartment and can they live safely? Generally, the rule of thumb we try to use is, would we put one of our own family members in an apartment or with this furniture? And if we wouldn't, then chances are we wouldn't do it with the refugees either. We often get inquiries into what people can donate. And so here's some ideas of the kinds of things that we're required to provide that certainly are donatable items. As I said, beds and box springs we don't generally take in order to avoid any possibility of bed bugs. But things like kitchen tables, kitchen chairs, we really have a hard time with kitchen chairs. For some reason we're able to get kitchen tables, but kitchen chairs are often hard to find. So if you have any or know of anyone that has some, we'd certainly be very appreciative of those. Couches are a requirement, at least one. Lamps, we have to have a lamp in every room, or at least overhead lighting in every room. We need one place setting, one set of dishes, pots and pans, mixing bowls, set of kitchen utensils, can opener. As you can see, those are bare minimums. Obviously we try to provide people with more than that, but we do the best we can and try to take care of people in the way that we can. Same with linens, one towel per person. Well, most people don't generally live with one tile, so we obviously try to provide more than that, but that's the bare minimum we're required to provide. One set of sheets and blankets. Again, we try to provide enough that people are safe, clean, and healthy, but that they have enough to live on. A pillow and a pillowcase, alarm clock, pencils, paint, light bulbs, all the basic things you need to live in an apartment. And again, going along with taking care of daily cleaning and hygiene needs, we have to provide them with dish soap, bathroom cleaners, sponges, cleaning rags, laundry detergent, waste baskets, mops, and dustpans, and those kinds of things. We have to provide them toilet paper, shampoo, soap, toothbrush, toothpaste, all those kinds of things. As I showed you in the picture before, we have to provide culturally appropriate food, so we need to be careful and look at, when we're stocking the apartment for the first few days of food, do we have food that their culture will eat, and is culturally sensitive to them, so we don't give certain groups pork or things like that. It's important to be sensitive to that. Clothing depends on the season. We have to provide seasonally appropriate clothing for folks. And sometimes we have refugees that come off the planes in sandals, and we need to have boots and winter coats and hats ready to go for them within the first day or so that they can be warm and safe in Erie, Pennsylvania. Another important part of our program is providing orientation to our new arrivals. And I think it's important for you to understand the kinds of things that we go over with them. That we talk to folks about what can they expect from us, what's our role in their life, what will Catholic Charities provide for them, and how will we be there for them, so they understand that. We stress from the early beginnings, from the very first day that they're here, that the expectation is they are economically self-sufficient within 8 months. That means they're going to have to work. Sometimes it means the mom and the dad have to work. And even if they come from a culture where moms don't work, sometimes that's going to be a necessity in order to meet economic self-sufficiency for their family. They can't just expect the government to provide food and health care and those kinds of things for them. So they need to know that right from the beginning. That starts overseas in the training, and it continues when they arrive with us. The expectation that you must find work and become self-sufficient. We also talk about the travel loan. We go over that again. They've gone over that and they've signed the promissory notes overseas, but when they come in to Erie, early in the process, we begin explaining to them how they need to go about repaying that loan and the significant responsibility that is. We also talk about it to them in terms of their credit rating. The credit's very important in the United States, and one of the ways they can establish credit is by repaying their travel loan on a timely basis. And things like health and hygiene, we go over. We have to get them to a medical appointment in the first few days that they're here to make sure that they are healthy and safe and everything's okay that way. We talk about personal and public hygiene, how to take care of yourself. Sometimes the expectations in the United States are different than their home country, and so we need to talk about that, whether it's how to use deodorant or how to not use too much cologne or perfume that you can overwhelm people. We talk about how to take care of medical needs. Where are the doctor's offices? How do you take care of medical emergencies? Who do you call? How do you do those kinds of things? And another important component we talk about is mental health. Many of these refugees have been through horrific experiences, and it's important for them to understand how to take care of their own mental health as well. As I stated before, newly arriving refugees are eligible for government assistance for the first few months they're here. And so one of the things we do is we help them understand how they need to go about doing that, and we assist them in doing this, getting signed up for food stamps, for refugee health assistance, those kinds of things. But we also talk about how to access childcare, because they do have to go to work very soon, and so they need to know where they can find safe and affordable childcare. We help them to know where food pantries or clothing banks are if that need should arise. Also of importance, we show them and talk to them about parks and recreation, where they can take their kids to play, where are playgrounds and fun areas where they can just run and have fun. That's important as well. Education is very important, both for the adults and the kids. We help to get the kids enrolled with the Erie School District, and we get the parents enrolled in English as a second language classes, job readiness classes, and all those kinds of things to get them ready to be employed as quickly as possible. We talk about employment all the time with our folks. Again, the goal is early self-sufficiency, and we help them prepare resumes, we help them get ready for work, and we talk about what the work culture will be like, what the expectations of employers are, and what benefits they get from the job. We spend a lot of time talking about housing, how to have a good relationship with their landlords. We're very appreciative of the landlords we have that work with us, and we're always looking for new landlords. But it's important for our refugees to take care of the places that they have, and for the most part they do. But sometimes we have problems, and so we have to work with them on how to resolve that and how to take care of things, how to pay their rent on time and their utility bills. We show them how to do that, we set them up, and we make sure that they follow through on that. We teach them how to use public transportation. You know, most of these refugees are not going to have automobiles for quite a while, so we teach them how to get around town, how to use public transportation, how the system works, those kinds of things. We talk about driver's licenses, how to get one, what that entails for when that time comes, and we talk about the importance of car insurance and that they can't be driving without car insurance. And a very important aspect we go over with them is safety. You know, the fire prevention, how to use smoke detectors, the importance of not smoking, and if they do, how to do that safely. Space heaters, personal safety, how to keep themselves safe, how to not walk with a lot of money in their pockets or flash it around for people to see. One of the things we have to talk to some of our cultural groups about is that they can trust the police. They come from countries where the police were the enemy, and so we have to explain to them that the police in the United States are there for their help. They will protect them, that they're good people, and they need to understand that. Again, as I said before, emergency phone numbers, they need to know who to call. They also need to know their own home phone number and address. All ways of receiving orientation to understand what life is like in Erie, Pennsylvania. The last set of things we go over in our orientation classes, again, deal more with how to be a good citizen of Erie and a good citizen of the United States. So we go over U.S. laws and policies. We have to talk to them about child care and abuse. You know, many of these refugee groups come from, you know, spare the rod, spoil the child mentalities, and we have to explain to them that we have child abuse laws in Pennsylvania and the United States. Domestic violence the same way. You know, there's a lot of times they've come from very violent situations and it carries over here, and so we have to talk about that. Same with sexual harassment. We have to teach people about smoking restrictions, where they can smoke, where they can't, how to know that, you know, how to look for the signs, those kinds of things. Public intoxication, really just the evils and concerns of drugs and alcohol at all. But, you know, what happens if you are publicly intoxicated, and the risk that you could be deported if you're breaking the laws, and especially in the early days of being here. We explain taxes and the need to pay taxes. You know, one of the misconceptions again about refugees is they come in and they don't have to pay taxes for 5 years. That's not true. As soon as they start working, as soon as they start buying things, they have to pay taxes on those things. And the last thing that's important, I think, for everyone to know, when refugees step off the plane, they are considered pretty much, they have all the rights and responsibilities of U.S. citizens except for voting. And one of those things is males age 18 to 25 have to sign up for the selective service. They are eligible for the draft immediately. So that's something we have to help them do to make sure they're in accord with that expectation. We spend time teaching people about the U.S. banking system. Some people are used to a banking system in their own country, but many have spent years in refugees camps, so we have to explain how the banking system works here, and the whole idea of paying income taxes so they understand what that works. And then again, we help them through all the phases of cultural adjustment, how to live their life here in the United States and in Erie, Pennsylvania versus where they came from. So who is being resettled in the Erie Diocese? Well, as you can see from this graph, the largest percentage in the last 4 to 5 years have been the Bhutanese community, members of the Bhutanese community. The second largest group has been Somalians, then Iraqis. And again, with Iraqis, I think it's important to understand the people coming from Iraq generally are people who either worked for the U.S. military there or worked with U.S. contractors. And if they stayed in Iraq, would be killed or would be targeted by ISIS and the terror groups. So it's not like we're just bringing Iraqis in just for the heck of it. For most of them, they are at serious risk because of the work they did with and for the U.S. government or U.S. contractor. Syrians, as you can see, that's been in the news a lot. So far we've only resettled 121. We expected that number to rise, but now with the hold on Syrian refugees, that remains unsure. And then the folks from the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Congolese, is our next largest group. So one of the questions is, so who are refugees, or what does it take to be a refugee? Why are people labeled as refugees? So let me give you an example of the Bhutanese, since that's been our largest group in the last 5 years. As you can see on this map, Bhutan is the country in red. What happened in Bhutan was the king of Bhutan decided that he only wanted ethnically pure Bhutanese in this country. The bottom half to third to half of the country were Bhutanese residents of Nepali descent, so therefore they were not ethnically Bhutanese. The king said, you must get out, and so he forced all those people to leave their country. Because they were of Nepali descent, Nepal let them in but said you must live in refugee camps. You can't just assimilate into our country. You can come here because you have nowhere else to go, but you must live in refugee camps. Many times you'll hear people say, that why don't the refugees just go back to their home country? In fact, during the last presidential campaign, Dr. Ben Carson went to a refugee camp and said, these folks don't really want to come to the United States, they want to go back to their home country. Well, that's almost by definition what a refugee is. Refugees don't want to leave their home country. They want to return. Here's a picture of what Bhutan looks like. As you can see, it's a very beautiful country. Of course, the Bhutanese refugees would love to go back to that country, but they can't. If they return, chances are very good they would be killed. So instead of living in the beautiful country of Bhutan, they're forced to Nepal to live in refugee camps, which, as you can see in this picture, are very crowded, very close quarters, not a lot of trees. The water comes from underground wells and isn't very hygienic. No electricity, and by and large just a pretty dismal place to live. But at least they have huts, as opposed to a lot of them that have a lot of refugee camps that only have tents. Unfortunately, when you live in such close quarters and you're forced to cook with open flame, fire is a possibility. And here's an example of a camp that someone's gas fire got out of control and burnt down the entire refugee village, decimated it. Which then meant the refugees were forced to live in little makeshift tents like the ones you see here for months at a time while they tried to rebuild the refugees camp. So when we talk about why do we help refugees, this is an example of what we're talking about. These are folks that did not want to leave their home country, have done nothing wrong, and are being forced to live in these abysmal situations. And what can we, as the wealthiest country in the world, do to help them? So one of the concerns of bringing refugees here is that they overwhelm our welfare system. As I've stated repeatedly throughout this talk, refugees are eligible for government assistance in the first few months that they're here. But how much assistance are they? Are they overwhelming the system? Are they bogging down the system and being an inexorbitant burden on taxpayers? Well, if you look at these statistics from the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services, I think it's hard to argue that they're overwhelming the system. Medical assistance is the health insurance part of welfare. And as you can see, just a little over half of 1% of all Pennsylvanians using medical assistance through the welfare system are refugees, 0.59%. TANF cash is the actual cash payments that go to people on welfare. That's less than 1% of the total Pennsylvania is receiving. Those are refugees. And SNAP is the food stamp program. That's what most people know it as, is the food stamp program. Again, less than 1% of all Pennsylvanians receiving food stamps were refugees. Here's two important statistics I think are important to understand. First of all, we hear all the time about welfare recipient, lifer welfare recipients. Well, in Pennsylvania, the average welfare recipient receiving TANF, which again is that's the cash payment for the welfare system. The average Pennsylvanian on receiving cash assistance through welfare is on the system for 917 days, or essentially about 2.5 years. So they're not really lifers on average. And we all know there's outliers that drive that up or take advantage of that. But what's important here is refugee TANF clients, refugees receiving cash assistance, spend an average of 216 days, or about 7.5 months. And as you remember, I told you before, they're eligible for services for up to 8 months. So they're off before the end. Generally speaking, almost always they're off before the 8-month period. So they spend less than a year. Imagine going to a different country yourself where you don't know the language very well, you have no job, have no home, and you get assistance for 7.5 months, and then you have to be on your own. Pretty remarkable. At the end of the day, the question we continually ask ourselves is, are refugees a net asset or a liability to the Erie community? At this point, we continue to believe that refugees are a net asset. The Erie population has hovered around 100,000 for years, and it is only close to that now. The only growth in the Erie population right now is in the refugee community. The refugees are starting new businesses, from grocery stores to car repair shops to jewelry and clothing stores. The refugee community, business community, is growing and thriving because they're willing to take chances, they're willing to help one another, and they're taking advantage of the American dream. The employers we work with are extremely pleased with the refugees that come to work with them. The biggest problem they have is with language, and so we're constantly working with our refugees to improve their language so that they can improve their job prospects. But the employers love their punctuality, their politeness, their follow-through, and it's just been very good for them and for us. One of the criticisms is that refugees take jobs of U.S. citizens. Well, we haven't found that to be true. The employers that are hiring our refugees are hiring them because they can't get anyone else, or the people that they do hire don't follow through the way that the refugees do. They don't show up consistently, they aren't polite, they're problem workers. So that's not something that refugees are on an equal plane taking jobs from U.S. citizens that would normally have those jobs. The school district, we're always in conversation with them to make sure that our refugee kids are doing okay. Again, language is often a difficulty, but as far as behavioral and academic issues, there's no major concerns at this point in time. And finally, the refugees are adding to the economic engine of Erie. They're purchasing homes, they're buying cars, they're buying appliances, they're actively involved, they're taking their jobs and their money in contributing to the economic impact, the economic vitality of the city and the county of Erie. At the end of the day, for me and for my staff and our agency, it comes down to Matthew 25. Whatsoever you did for the least of my people, that you do unto me. As I said at the very beginning when I talked about the mission of the Erie Diocese, to be part of the mission of the Universal Church, I believe we're doing that and meeting Matthew 25. For I was hungry and you gave me food, I was thirsty and you gave me drink, a stranger and you welcomed me. I hope that's what we're doing as Catholic Charities Counseling Adoption Services, and I believe that's what we're doing as the Diocese of Erie.